Hello and welcome to the Centre for Computing History. Now, it's been a long time since you've seen us. There's been an awful lot going on at the museum. The main thing is we've been moving towards our museum accreditation, which we're hoping to hear about very, very shortly.
Fingers crossed. We've also had a load of events going on, a load of new items entering the collection here. And
talking of which, we're going to be talking about something to do with our old friend here, the ZX Spectrum. Of course, we've seen 1001 videos of the ZX Spectrum. We've actually got something quite a bit more exciting to show you.
Yep.
So for this, I need to have my anti-static strip on here. And I need my rubber gloves.
Yep. As far as we know, this has never been seen before on YouTube, or in public, for that matter.
Never been seen anywhere in public. So what we've been doing, we've been visiting the offices of 9 Tiles, who are local to us, and they've handed us something pretty amazing. And here we are. So this is a ZX Spectrum prototype from somewhere around July 1981, I believe. Right, so Phil, what we've got in front of us here is the birth of the ZX Spectrum.
Basically, yeah, this is the Spectrum prototype. Hand assembled after the design was final enough that they were pretty sure it would work. Shipped off to somebody who could make the software to run on it. It's a piece of history, basically. Before it even made it into being a printed circuit board, this was the wire-wrapped, lovingly made Spectrum to be. And yeah, let's take a look at it.
Right, okay, so got to handle it very, very carefully. Okay, so the first thing we noticed when it was handed to us, funnily enough, was the speaker, the Z80 here, the ULA, and it's only when we really look closely at the keyboard we notice it does resemble.
It's pretty similar.
Well, it's almost exact, so all the same commands.
Yeah, the only difference you notice, apart from the slightly obvious non-staggered layout, is the keycaps missing from these 2 keys here. Of course, being stickers, they've fallen off sometime in the last 30 years, but all the other keys exactly as the production model. So we've actually got the main board from an issue 1 Spectrum here, and if you put them side by side, you notice they're actually very similar. They're almost flipped horizontally, so the RF modulator is on the right, my right, rather than over here. The RAM is socketed down this side rather than in a nice neat row over here, but all the major components are there. In fact, the speaker we mentioned earlier, over here, still over there, big old heatsink. For anti-ULA, this one of course doesn't have the markings printed on it. Presumably it's a very small run of a pre-production sample set. And you can see all these little bodges here, little dead bug things all over the place. Got the power thingy over there that generates the negative and 12 volt voltages for the RAM. That's all over here nice and neat in the final version.
So we have presumably the ROMs that they were working on.
Yeah, and if you look at the labels, they're labelled 01 and 23, and they're dated, is that 30th July?
Looks like 30th of July.
And 1430, I think. Date code maybe, version number, who knows.
So the ROM on the original, of course, is over here.
Single chip, much larger capacity. And yeah, you've got these little weird terminators or current limiters, I'm not quite sure what they do, but they're on the address and data buses. That's all built in to the PCB on the production one. Production unit still had this little sort of dead bug bodge fix here, something to do with I/O contention on the ULA. Issue 3 board, I think, fixed that. But yeah, the only thing obviously missing from the prototype is the cassette interface, which is built in over here.
So on this one, it's actually
hardwired
in.
A little bit different. And the keyboard, of course, rather than the cheap and slightly flimsy little flat flex connector, they've got a big old D-sub connector here.
And of course, a far more substantial keyboard as well.
Yeah, I'd have actually really liked to use that keyboard on the actual Spectrum, but
costs and all the rest. Yeah. So all the chips are very helpfully labelled.
Yeah, you've got these little stickers all over the place. So Z80, of course, ULA, RAM 0 through 7. No support for upgrading it to 48K, because of course it's a prototype. Just getting the thing running was the main aim of the deal. Yeah, a load of little these trim pots, variable capacitors, not quite sure. Some sort of analogue-y thing maybe. It's all around, this is a video chip of some sort combining signals to produce composite. Of course that's all power over there.
And what we're actually hoping to do in the very near future is we were going to have both Kate and John Grant here at the museum to do an interview who can really
shed some more light on
the whole history of this little prototype. We do know it has been at Nine Tails for the whole of its life.
Yeah, I think they've done an interview before that covered some of this story, and I think they said they received the hardware units fairly late in the day, so they didn't actually get to use this all that much in the development.
And of course the Spectrum ROM was never finished.
Yeah, I don't know if Sinclair rushed it to market or decided it was good enough, but it was famously fairly slow to run. Presumably they had more optimizations.
I think it's also quite interesting if we can unplug the keyboard here and turn the board over.
It's all wire wrap. Fairly common for prototyping back in the day. You'd use a special sort of twisty gun thing to crimp, not say crimp, what's the word? Wrap. Yes, wrap, sorry. And the clue's in the name, isn't it? To wrap the wires onto the square pins. And if you do it right, you form a really nice seal that will last ages. That can also be unwound in the event of problems in the wiring.
And of course then we have more of the helpful stickers.
Yeah, particularly if you're, because when you're wrapping the wires, you're doing it upside down, all the pin numbers are back to front. It's very easy to get confused and wire it all up, then have to undo it all.
So Richard Altwasser did the hardware, almost certainly the hardware that we're seeing here, and Steve Vickers at Nine Tails was tasked with producing the basic ROM. It's often thought that Steve Vickers worked for Sinclair. I've seen it written a lot on the internet that he was a Sinclair employee. He wasn't, he worked at Nine Tails.
So they were contracted to do the software development.
Yes.
And they had some pedigree there because they worked on the ZX80 and the 81 ROMs as well.
Indeed. So Richard Altwasser and Steve Vickers both left their respective companies before the Spectrum was quite finished and went off and formed Cantab that later on produced the Jupiter Ace.
Yeah, it's probably time to wrap it up. Obviously this is only a quick overview of something that's very recently arrived to become part of the collection here permanently at the Centre for Computing History in Cambridge.
So the main thing to do here is really thank Kate and John for handing this prototype over to us. We're really very, very excited by it.
Yeah, a lot of people who worked on these pioneering systems back in the day tend to store them in their sheds, in their attics, assume that they're not worth anything, and they end up being trashed much later on. So to have somebody realise that they've actually got a piece of history in their house and they're willing to have it preserved for future generations is a really cool thing.
Okay, so thank you very much for watching, and we hope to do more of these videos this year. As I say, we've been incredibly busy, but we hope to find the time to show more of these things to you in the near future. So thank you very much for watching.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Like and subscribe.
Please do. Also visit